everyone. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask any members of the media that have any questions throughout this event to please share them through the chat function. And we will be happy to answer them for you after our final speaker. Thank you. We'll begin shortly. I'm Dr. Coralanne Griffith-Hunte, and I'm a human, industrial, and trauma psychologist. In my career, I've had the honor to advise and collaborate with members of the United Nations, the Senate, Congress, and the Assembly, the Geneva Center in Switzerland, mayors, district attorneys, and countless others. However, one of the highlights of my career is collaborating with my dear friend, Lucy Lang. Lucy has allowed her life to speak. She has been a force in the criminal justice reform. She's smart. She's courageous. She's compassionate. Oh, and she can fight for what is right. Lucy has the values, the vision, the virtue, and the voice to be our next Manhattan DA. We are at a historical moment in the criminal justice system here in New York and across the country. People are standing up and they are crying out for change. A justice system that for so long has sought to punish instead of heal, to incarcerate instead of rehabilitate. This system has torn families apart, left those most impacted without a voice, and have devastated our communities, particularly the Black and Brown communities, who have had to deal with the devastation of historical, complex, and collective trauma and mass incarceration. It's time for a change. The Manhattan DA must rise up to the challenge of leading the long overdue transformation, the transformation that the justice system needs, while uplifting the dignity, equity, and safety for every New Yorker. I can say without hesitation, and I say it proudly, that there is absolutely no one as prepared to take on this tremendous responsibility than Lucy Lang. Lucy is a national criminal justice reform leader. She spent her career working hand in hand with people that are most impacted by the justice system, from crime victims to incarcerated people, their families, and entire communities. She's shown how to change the system because, you know what? She knows it. And how does she know it? Because she spent her entire career working to reform it, both from the inside as the assistant DA, where she worked with survivors of violent crimes and their families, and also from the outside as the director of the Institute for Innovation in Prosecution. the policies that she's created and developed together with top progressive prosecutors from across the country, advocates and impacted families, some of whom you will hear from today, are at the forefront of the criminal justice reform movement. There is absolutely no one better that defines what it means to be a progressive prosecutor and reformer, I should say, than my dear friend, Lucy Lang. Now, anyone that truly knows Lucy knows that she pushes up her sleeves and she gets to work when it comes to policy. That means that she studies the issues and she works closely with diverse voices to craft groundbreaking solutions to solve problems. And that's exactly why we are all here today. We are here for courageous conversation. And the one thing I love about Lucy is that it just doesn't stay at courageous conversation. Lucy gets right to work. She creates an action plan for implementation. It's incredible working alongside her, seeing her work and be that change agent that she truly is here in New York and across the country. I am honored to have her as my friend. She's an incredible woman, and indeed, the next, and I mean it, she's gonna make history, the next Manhattan District Attorney, none other than Lucy Lang.
Wow, thank you so much for the incredible welcome, Dr. Hunt. You are such a gift to me and to our city. Thank you all for joining me here today, and special thank you to Mississippi District Attorney Scott Colombe, Jerrell Daniels, and Victoria Davis, who you'll be hearing from shortly. Thank you to the three of you for supporting me every day in our shared mission to build a Manhattan DA's office that works for every New Yorker. I'm Lucy Lang. I'm a mom, a former assistant district attorney who has worked with survivors of heinous violence, and a national criminal justice reform leader who has worked alongside incarcerated New Yorkers in our prisons. I'm running for district attorney to realize the full potential of what the DA can do, promote the dignity of every New Yorker, uphold racial and gender equity, prioritize the prevention of crime, and restore communities most impacted by it. That's why I'm honored to earn the endorsement of the people most impacted by the system, as well as by people leading the charge to reform it, including a dozen leading progressive prosecutors from across the country, survivors of Harvey Weinstein's sexual abuse, and police reform activists and family members of those who've lost loved ones to police violence. It's apropos that in New York, as I'm sitting in my new campaign office, I can hear the sirens in the background and the subways under feet. And this is what we love about New York City, is the thriving bustle of it all. Because I'm a New Yorker, and because I've worked in the system, and because I've worked with the people who are on this call today, I know that the role of the district attorney encompasses much more than prosecution alone. Many years ago, I handled a case in which two masked gunmen stepped out from behind a parked car on Upper Broadway and opened fire, hitting 5 people and killing one, the father of a 3-year-old. Over the course of a many-month investigation, I became close to the mother of the young man who'd been killed, and ultimately the gunmen were identified, brought to trial, and a jury returned a verdict of guilty. The morning after the verdict, I called the mother of the young man who'd been killed, who was working round the clock and raising her grandson. And I asked her how she felt. She replied, "I slept all night for the first time since my son was killed. But when I woke up, all I could think about were the moms of those 2 boys," referring to the 2 men who had just been convicted of murdering her son. Her incredible generosity inspired me to create a first of its kind college and prison course that you'll hear more about today. It brings assistant district attorneys inside New York's prisons to work on justice reform alongside the people most impacted by the system. And the next Manhattan District Attorney must take a 360-degree view of the system and how it impacts everyone it touches: victims, incarcerated people, their families and children, and the communities we all live in. The criminal justice system and our city at large is at a historic moment. New Yorkers from all communities are standing up and crying out for change to a system of mass incarceration that has disproportionately devastated communities of color and poor communities. They're calling for change to a system that has privileged the wealthy and elite over everyday New Yorkers who are doing their best to get by, and for change to a system that has for far too long been cold and uncaring to people most impacted by it, whether they are victims, incarcerated, or families of those people. And with the support of Manhattan residents from across the borough, that change starts on day one, when I hope to earn your vote and serve as the next Manhattan District Attorney. But it's not enough to talk about reform. The next DA must have a plan for how she'll actually lead the office and the experience to turn bold ideas into real, tangible, progressive reform. And that's why today I'm so proud to release my policy book, A Roadmap for Justice in Manhattan, a vision for how together we'll transform the criminal justice system and build a DA's office that is rooted in the dignity, equity, and safety of every member of our community. The roadmap was built in close collaboration with community advocates, subject matter experts, and system impacted New Yorkers, including the speakers you'll hear from today. This vision includes 27 policy plans that I will implement as the next Manhattan District Attorney to end mass incarceration, prioritize public safety, promote accountability, and foster community. It includes detailed plans for advancing racial and restorative justice, tackling rising gun crime and restoring communities impacted by crime, overhauling the sex crimes unit so it puts the needs of survivors first, holding police accountable when they commit harm and changing the culture of policing, treating mental health and substance misuse as public health issues, and ensuring that every Manhattan resident, no matter who they are or who their lawyer may be, is treated equally. The vision that we've released today is just the start. It is an actionable map for reform, as well as a report card for when I'm district attorney, so that Manhattan voters know where I stand and will deliver on the bold transformation we've laid out today. With 76 days to go until the primary, one thing is clear. I'm ready to step in and lead on day one to implement the long overdue change that the office needs and that the city is calling out for. Our campaign is driven by people most impacted by the system. And as district attorney, I will ensure not only that their voices are heard, but that they have a seat at the table every day and have their views reflected at all levels of the office. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. Let's make history together. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Dr. Hunt, with my great gratitude, and look forward to questions later in the program.
Thank you so much, Lucy. You see what I mean? This is what we're talking about. A leader who is thinking about progressive reform and fostering community. That being said, I would love the opportunity now to introduce our first guest, DA Scott Colombe. Scott Colombe is the district attorney for Mississippi's 16th Circuit District, where he has garnered national attention for his progressive criminal justice reforms. DA Colombe previously served as the youngest and first African-American Justice Court judge, the first African-American prosecutor for the city of Columbus, Mississippi, and is now serving as the first African-American district attorney for the 16th Circuit, and the first African-American elected DA to a majority white district. Ladies and gentlemen, change maker, DA Scott Colombe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunter. I appreciate that welcome, and I'm so honored to be a part of this program. Looking forward to hearing from the other speakers. I love what Dr. Hunt said about Lucy, and I love what Lucy said about her plans as the next Manhattan DA. Just to say a little bit about myself, I was elected district attorney for the 16th Circuit, which is a rural part of Northeast Mississippi in 2015. I defeated a 27-year incumbent running on a platform of criminal justice reform. At the time, the progressive prosecutor movement really hadn't kicked off. And so it wasn't something where I had a roadmap of how the voters felt about reform. But my election and subsequent elections have really shown that the voters are really committed to ending mass incarceration, having fairness and equity in our criminal justice system. And that's why I think Lucy is the right candidate to be the next Manhattan DA, is because I've had experiences with her where she's talked the talk and walked the walk prior to campaigning. I met Lucy when the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution had what we call an executive session, where a group of national criminal justice reform leaders all across the country came together to try to look at what are the problems in our criminal justice system and the best ways to improve it and end mass incarceration. Lucy was one of the main organizers of that and one of the key facilitators of it. And throughout that process, she got an opportunity to hear from really all of the leading, not only progressive prosecutors, but also people directly impacted. I remember Sean Bell's mother, I think Valerie Bell was a part of it, and she was really transformative in talking about her experience with her son and restorative justice and experts at harm reduction. And so throughout that, you could see that what was so special about Lucy was she balanced listening to others and taking in new information, but also she had the experience where she was offering insight to the other leaders in a way that was really impactful. And so that was a great experience. And what she's saying now on the campaign trail is not different than what she was saying back before she was thinking about running for DA. She was a big believer in restorative justice and finding ways to reduce the criminal justice system's footprint in people's lives, a big believer in police accountability, a big supporter in racial equity and making sure that policing is done in a way that builds up communities and doesn't tear them down. And so, throughout that process, I really admire her commitment to reform. And so now that she's running for DA, the public is getting a chance to see those views, and they get an opportunity to implement those views with somebody that's committed. And what I think is so key, because now I'm in this world, and it's being a reformer is difficult. It's difficult in Mississippi, it's difficult in Chicago, it's difficult in St. Louis, it's difficult in LA, San Francisco. The status quo does a lot to protect itself. And once the campaign is over, a lot of the people that are really built into the status quo, they focus on the day-to-day of the criminal justice system, where the voters move on with their lives. And so that's why it's so important that you have somebody like Lucy that's giving out a plan for what she's going to do, right? So now everybody has an opportunity, and if you're watching this, or if you're a reporter, read her plan, see what she says she's going to do. And now, after she gets elected, there's going to be no surprises when she bucks the status quo. Because she told the voters what her plans were, and the voters can hold her accountable to those plans. And that's what I really admire about her plan. It's very detailed. It talks about a lot of the issues. I mean, it was 60 pages of reform. I couldn't read all of it, but it was clear from reading it that she was going to focus on advancing racial justice, that she was committed to ending mass incarceration, expanding restorative justice, which is very key. One of the things about restorative justice is that heals victims in a way that our system hasn't done in the past. A lot of times district attorneys claim they were representing victims, but really they were representing what they viewed was right and not really looking at a holistic view of what victims actually want. Because a lot of times the victims of violence also have impact by the system both ways. I mean, the view that there's these victims out here that or anyways, it's more complicated. My experience is more complicated than the narrative that sometimes you hear from the media. And the final thing is that I want to say that I think is important and why I really admire Lucy is that she's really been intentional about reaching out to people that have been directly impacted by our system, because we have to champion those voices, because those are the key people that can help us get out of the mess that we found ourselves in. We have to champion those people. We have to provide opportunities for them. And those are the people that can help us reduce recidivism, help us reduce our footprint. And so I'm proud to support Lucy, and I know she's gonna do a great job. She's the next DA in Manhattan.
Thank you for those encouraging words and that support. You helped to fire me up even more. You know, you DA Colombe, when you mentioned that Lucy shows character that we need, and that, you know, it's so important that we understand that one of the most essential human experiences is just listening. And that is what Lucy does indeed. She listens, she holds individuals accountable, and she is our face for restorative justice. And so I thank you so much for being here with us, DA Colombe. And next, we will hear from Jerrell Daniels. Jerrell Daniels is a law school bound student and research assistant at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. He is a Friends of the Island Youth Leadership Peer Mentor and a member of the 2018 Justice in Education Scholars Cohort at Columbia University. Since his release from prison, he has become a sought-after speaker, he's phenomenal, on college campuses, where he has shared the experiences that led to his incarceration and that of others from similar communities. He is the founder of Justice Ambassadors, which brings together at-risk New York City kids with city officials to develop policy together. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerrell Daniels.
Thank you, Corinne, for that wonderful introduction. Lucy, thank you for the opportunity to share a few words about my journey and really what inspired me to be the man that I am today. When I look in the mirror, you know, I see someone who spent a quarter of his life in state prison, 6 years to be exact, for an act that nearly cost a man his life. But if I'm being honest, what got me from prison to Columbia University and standing before you all today, it wasn't the punishment I faced as a teenager in adult prison or the harshness of our legal system. Instead, it was the learning environment of a unique classroom that introduced me to something I didn't think was possible. My life was changed the day that I walked into Lucy's college program inside the Queensboro Correctional Facility. The course was called Inside Criminal Justice. And for all of us, and even those who are listening, this might seem pretty much straightforward, but it was actually the complete opposite. It turns out that the class would be made up of 16 students, 8 incarcerated men, and 8 assistant district attorneys. Now, when I walked into this room, I assumed that all the prosecutors in the space would be white, but to my surprise, they were Black, they were Latinx, and they were multi-gendered prosecutors in the room. But I think over the course of the semester, what we learned together was really the lived experiences and what helped shape the individual lives that were presented in that classroom. So for me personally, it was really like me walking back through the steps of my life and all of the challenges and obstacles I had to overcome, and ultimately my incarceration. And if I walk through my life and the amount of exposure of violence in my neighborhood and even the household violence as my mother suffered through a domestic violence relationship, all of those things kind of influenced the decisions that I make. And it led to me committing the worst mistake in my life, where in an incident where I was trying to protect my sister, I took things to the extreme that the man was deeply, seriously injured. But all of those things in my past and even the challenges that I overcame, they don't define my future. And as I stand before you today, I do aspire to become a United States Senator, specifically represent New York State, as New York has never had an African-American person represent them in Congress as a senator. And in US history, there's only ever been 10 Black US senators. So I want to add to that narrative. I want to really empower communities that come from a long history with mass incarceration to be the change makers that they desperately need in these communities. And no, you don't have to do it through politics and government. but it's really just thinking about how you can contribute in a meaningful way to make a societal change. But I really want to highlight the fact that the prosecutors who joined the Inside Criminal Justice course, this was an eye-opening moment for them as well. As you can assume, the institutions that we attend, the law schools and undergraduate institutions, much of the way that they condition and train our minds to think is in the, potentially the role that we're going to step into. But sometimes we forget about the human aspect of it. We forget about challenges, and we forget about environmental circumstances that influences the way young people or people in general develop. And I think that what this course was able to do outside of the theoretical frameworks that we addressed in the course and outside of the collaboration with prosecutors in the course, what we really learned, the most meaningful part of it, is that people develop differently based on the opportunities and resources that are readily available to them. So I would say that I was honestly fortunate and privileged to be in the right place at the right time, but really it was Lucy's bravery and courage and her innovative idea that she took before Cy Vance to launch the Inside Criminal Justice course. And Lucy had never give credit, so it's up to people like me to really give the credit where it's due. This is the first time in United States history where a prosecutor has actually encouraged her, their office to send representatives from the DA's office inside of a state prison to work with the incarcerated population for over a semester-long period. And for it to not just be a one-off kind of thing, Lucy is continuing to launch these different cohorts at different facilities. So the program has expanded since then. But this idea of bringing prosecutors in close proximity with those who are directly responsible for committing offenses in the community and allowing their ideas and expertise to inform policy recommendations. Lucy, again, I just got to mention, like, this is historic. And again, you're going to make history again when you're appointed as the Manhattan District Attorney. You're going to be the first woman that steps into that role. And we need women leaders. Society won't acknowledge it, but sometimes the best person for the job is a woman. It's time for men to really stand aside and allow the leadership and guidance of women to shape the societal conditions that we're living through. And really, the reason why I really stand behind Lucy is her bravery and her commitment. She didn't wait till she was an elected official to lead this progressive wave of change for district attorneys. She convened work groups, trainings, hosted programmers, developed reentry programs and services. She's instrumental in the work that she's been doing since before she even decided to lead a campaign to become an elected district attorney. So I would say that my reasoning behind supporting Lucy is not for her aspirations and what she wants to do when she becomes, it's for the work that she's already done. That she'll continue to do whether she's elected as a Manhattan District Attorney or not. So that's the reason why I'm supporting Lucy Lang for Manhattan District Attorney. And that's the reason why I encourage other people, especially those who have had similar experiences as me, to stand behind the Lucy Lang campaign. And I guess that's really what I wanted to offer to the conversation.
Absolutely. I appreciate all that you have said, because indeed, in my experience with Lucy, being a psychologist, a trauma expert, Lucy's aware of the ACEs, what we call the adverse childhood experiences, and the fact that 7 out of 10 of our children are impacted by some form of trauma. And so as I was listening to you, Mr. Daniels, I heard that you spoke about her contribution before the campaign even came into being a thing in her future. She has remained consistent, and indeed her life has always spoken to us in a positive way. And that's our Lucy. That's just who she is. And we support her, because this is not something that's just came out of her being because of a campaign. This is the character of Lucy Lang. And we appreciate you, Mr. Daniels, for sharing. And now we will hear from Victoria Davis. Victor is an organizer, founder of a small agency, Sister of Justice, and most importantly, the sister of Delrawn Small, who was killed by NYPD on July 4th, 2016. The NYPD officer was unjustly found not guilty. After an almost 6-week trial, Victoria hasn't given up and has a campaign calling on his firing. A unique part of Victoria that Lucy learned as they built a special friendship and bond over the years is that she is extremely open about being a child sexual abuse victim and now thriver at the hands of an adoptive family for almost 10 years after her mom died. She currently helps survivors with healing from sexual trauma with the focus on foster youth. Thank you so much for being here with us, Victoria.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And please, guys, please do not mind my iPad. Lucy is so important to me. I wanted to make sure that I'm not leaving anything out. So not only as a Manhattan resident, I want to support Lucy for so many reasons. And I'll read them to you, so excuse me if I look down a little bit. But on July 4th, 2016, that is a day that changed my life forever. Thankfully, I have families nationally who are police killing victims, mothers of victims, and families. NYPD officer Wayne Isaacs murdered my brother. He murdered Delrawn by shooting him 3 times in front of his 4-month-old baby, teenage stepdaughter, and girlfriend. NYPD officer Isaacs is still employed with the NYPD, and he's being paid with our taxpayer dollars. It's been nearly 5 years. I'm still fighting for accountability, not justice, because I have a literal justice who was 2 years old, and I named him in honor of my brother, who is my hero. All Black Lives Matter, absolutely, with no question or any consent. To make sure our point and demands are clear, the right leaders have to be voted in. Ones with interest of the people. And that's why I'm so proud to support Lucy running for Manhattan DA. I was proud to work with Lucy to help her build her bold plan for police accountability, as she is supportive of activists like myself in the fight to defund the police and allocate funds where they belong, such as education, social work, and support for victims of sex crimes. Lucy has supported all of my endeavors and has provided mentorship to me. We worked together to create a national toolkit for prosecutors to address officer-involved fatalities when Lucy was leading the Institute for Innovations in Prosecution. Lucy's plan to transform the power dynamic of policing in Manhattan includes everything from independently investigating policeman misconduct to identifying officers as the DA partners with grassroots community-led groups to interrupt violence and over-policing. Lucy's plan was built alongside the communities that are impacted most. It's true for her policing plan, and it's certainly true for her plan to build a sex crimes unit that puts survivors first. That's exactly the type of leadership we need in a DA's office. Lucy built her sex crimes plan in partnership and alongside survivors of sex crimes like myself and survivors of Harvey Weinstein, sexual abuse victims who have also endorsed her candidacy. I wanted to just explain a little bit about myself on a personal level and why her work with sex crimes victims are important. I lived with an adopted family after my mom died when I was 9 and my mom was only 29. And throughout that time that we lived with this adopted family and prior to that, navigated the foster care system, I went through a lot of sexual abuse, and it forced me to find power in it by healing and helping other victims. And it was just so empowering to hear that Lucy holds that. And Lucy and I have had conversations about a whole lot of things, and she's always very opening to listening. And I know that those conversations are so hard to hear, especially from a victim themselves. And she's heard those stories numerous times, but not only as a victim, but she sees me as a friend, not just Delrawn's small sister. She's never introduced me as Delrawn's sister. She introduces me as her friend, but I see Lucy as my mentor, and that's how I introduce Lucy. And Lucy inspires me to one day become a prosecutor. I encourage everyone to read Lucy's plan, and you'll see that it was built to put survivors first. And Lucy will hold all those who commit sex crimes accountable, no matter how wealthy or how powerful or how connected they may be. But it's more than just her smart approach to policy. It's the fact that Lucy doesn't just listen, she truly hears people. And I feel that Lucy truly hears me. To Lucy, I'm Victoria Davis. I'm a mother, I'm a civil servant, I'm a student, I'm a small business owner. It sounds simple, but those qualities are very rare when we're speaking of people in politics. I'm proud to stand with Lucy, and I know Lucy stands with me. And with every New Yorker that has been impacted by the system in various ways, I ask that you stand with Lucy as Lucy will stand for us. And like Jarrell stated, we do need a woman in office, and we need Lucy in office, and we'll see the change in Manhattan, and we'll just see the change overall. So thank you so much, Lucy, and you got this. And you know I'm a dramatic, so I'm just standing up. I'm just standing up because I definitely want to give you all of the credit that you deserve. And I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Victoria, for your bravery in sharing what you have shared with us today. Indeed, Lucy is a mentor. Lucy is known for hearing and expressing empathy, which is so important, and compassion. And as it relates to sexual violence, Lucy understands that trauma doesn't have an expiration date, and that there's not a one size fits all, or not even a one size fits most, but that we have to cater to the individual needs of the members within our community. And there is no other person that can handle this the way that my dear friend Lucy Lang can. You see, what you have experienced today has been courageous conversation. It resonates for me the words of Thurgood Marshall, who said, "Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out. Because this is our country. This is our democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." I've been so honored to be here today to support my friend. Thank you to our esteemed guests. You truly are change makers. You truly have shared the intimate parts of Lucy Lang, parts that the regular person may not see just by seeing her, on the street or as she works. And, Lucy has been serving food. Lucy has been in the community, giving out free items to community members. I'm telling you, I support Lucy because she's the real deal. She's who we need in that Manhattan DA's office. Not simply because she's a woman, and that's a plus. Not simply because she has done work across the country that we can be proud of, but simply because she's the intellectual, strong, smart person that can carry us through this phase that we are currently in here in New York. I ask you to support my friend, the change maker, the history maker, none other than the wonderful Lucy Lang.
I'm so moved by all of your words and grateful for these relationships and all I have learned and know I'll continue to learn from all of you. I see there are a couple questions from the audience, which I'll take now before we conclude finally. One question is whether this is the end of the plans for our campaign. And the answer to that is certainly not. These plans are ones that we have been working on for months, but that are informed by my many years of work prior to the campaign. And they're plans that are very much a work in progress. So I invite everyone who's listening and anyone who cares about the issues to review them and offer input and feedback and reach out anytime. They are so much an evolution. And I can't say that even with 27 plans that we have gotten to, everything that needs to be addressed by any stretch, but it does include changing the Economic Crimes Bureau. It includes building out the public corruption unit to better investigate officials and elected officials who commit misconduct. It includes unglamorous management pieces like how to change the performance metrics for assistant district attorneys who serve in the office and how to restructure things to better serve communities. So thank you very much for that question. I saw there was also a question running as a DA, for DA as a progressive reformer at a time when there's a rise in violence across the city. How do you plan to keep people safe, address the rise in gun violence over the last year, and reform the system at the same time? And I push back on and in fact reject anyone who says that we can't have a safe city and have criminal justice transformation. And I have learned this from Jarrell better than from anyone else, that long prison sentences, especially meted out against young people, are simply not the way to heal our communities, that there is so much room for partnership with community-based organizations, violence interrupters, credible messengers, to end the cyclical nature of gun violence in our communities. And it's because of both Jarrell's experience and the experience of the mother I described earlier in the hour, whose son was killed due to gun violence, that from the day I launched this campaign, I had a comprehensive plan to address the increase in gun violence in our city that includes a fast-track gun court so that these cases don't languish for a year and a half and we don't rely on mandatory minimums as the sole response to gun possession. So I invite everyone to look at that plan and all the other plans that are laid out in here. I thank you all so much for being with us and would ask Dr. Hunt to close us out with my deep gratitude to everyone who tuned in, but most especially to my friends and heroes who joined in support of the rollout of this policy book, available at votelucylang.com. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Lucy Lang, dignity, equity, and safety. And I said it early in the beginning when we first started this conversation. Lucy represents the vision. She represents the values that we need to be implemented here in New York State. And you know what? It will be the model for the country. She has the virtue that position needs. So we know that she has the vision, the virtue, the values. And not only will her voice matter, but your voice will matter. Why? Because it always has. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for being with us. I thank the guests. You all are phenomenal change makers. And I applaud you for all that you have done thus far. And that's right, Victoria, all that you all have done thus far. To Lucy, this is personal for me. You are a dear friend, a woman that I I'm not impressed by a lot of people, and I tell you all the time, you impress me. And I've been in this work for over 25 years. It's time. We all have been saying that we need a change. Well, ladies and gentlemen, change has come, and change is here. And the name for the person that will give you the change that we all need is Lucy Lang. Support her. Support her, because really what it will do is change New York, and we need it. Lucy, I thank you. I appreciate you. You're a wonderful role model, wonderful woman, and above all, wonderful leader. Thank you all for being here. God bless you.